So I quit that job and sold my house, sold my car, and bought a ticket to go volunteer for this other organization in Nicaragua. I kind of had this idea that if I went and spent a year of my life and gave it to God and went and charged something for the kingdom, that we'd make a big impact, and then perhaps I could go on with the rest of my life, you know?
Yeah, check that box and kind of move forward.
Right. Yeah. Because at that point in your life, a year seems like an eternity. We spent that year in Nicaragua and didn't get anything done. Like I couldn't point to you like really one thing that we achieved or accomplished other than getting to know the Nicaraguan people, the culture. I learned a decent bit of the language in that year, but we came back and it was a formative year, but we really hadn't gotten anything done.
All right, everyone. Today we have another episode of the Persisting in Purpose podcast. It has been a while, forgive us, but we now are in our new studio here in Raleigh, North Carolina. And I'm so excited because today I get to sit down with Alan Wilser. Alan's someone who I met at a Friday morning Christian men's breakfast get together. They call it Rise and Grind. And met him probably coming up on a year ago and just got to quickly learn how intentional he is, what an amazing heart he has, and what he's doing through his nonprofit. And so Alan has a nonprofit called SuNica. It's based in Nicaragua. And so today, as we start this conversation, I just wanted to invite you to tell us and all those who are listening about what is SuNica and how did you get into doing that?
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks for having me, Greg. Really cool studio. Feels feels nice and I don't know, warm and fun in here. So yeah, good to be here. And so yeah, SuNica, man, goes back to 2009, really. So what's that? 17 years ago.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that's when we founded. Actually, spent the year living in Nicaragua in 2007. So sorry, that's 19 years ago. 2009 is
My
we,
math.
we gotta get our math straight
Yeah,
here.
our math.
It's 2026. So
Yeah,
yeah,
that would be
19 years
17 years.
ago, lived in Nicaragua for the year. And then we founded SuNica
Okay.
17 years ago. So yeah, it really just kind of stemmed from a period of my life, starting in probably 2005, just started feeling like a wrestling inside of me. I mean, I guess you could call it a call, but just felt like God was pushing me to go into the world and do something. Like a lot of people during this period of time, I saw the film Invisible Children, which was, it actually became an organization that's not still in existence. But the thing that kind of kicked that off was a documentary that these guys did, and they were about 25 years old. I was 25 years old at this time.
Yeah.
And so they were in Uganda and Sudan and had captured this human rights abuse thing that had happened. And they'd kind of written themselves into the documentary in a way that you could kind of see them having this experience in Uganda and Sudan, but they were also capturing, this kind of heinous thing that was happening. A warlord was, abducting children and forcing them to do horrible things and be a part of his guerrilla army. And this is the kind of thing that if I'd heard it on BBC, it wouldn't have meant anything. But because I saw these 25-year-old guys that, talked like me, looked like me from the United States, and they had captured this, it became real in a way that made me think that, if people from, I guess the developed world, the first world, Christians specifically, would simply devote their lives to fixing real problems like this one, that you could probably make a dent on it, So it just became real in a different way. So that was stirring in my heart, and you know, kind of started this fundraising thing with a bunch of young adults at my church at Hope Community Church here in Raleigh. And so I was the chief fundraising guy for Uganda trips.
Yeah.
But every year when it came time to buy tickets to go to Uganda, I just didn't have the desire. Um, And, part of it was that I would have had to have burned all 2 weeks of my vacation at the time to go do it. And I couldn't get excited about like going there for 2 weeks with no plan. We didn't have an organization we were partnering with. We were just going to go. And, there was other people that had like way more flexibility. And so I just would let them go in my stead. And then I did that 2 years in a row and kind of, I enjoyed the fundraising aspect of it. Still felt like I was supposed to go somewhere in the world and do something, but it just didn't, it wasn't Africa. So I actually bumped into a gal that I went to seventh grade with, right? Not sixth, not eighth, just seventh. My mom got a wild hair that year and sent us to a different middle school and was in classes with this gal named Jessica Pease, right? And she had muscular dystrophy. So in muscular dystrophy, your muscles are sort of in a state of atrophy until ultimately you just can't live anymore. So she was, I think the doctors said maybe 18 years. She ended up living to 36. And so at this point, we were in our mid 20s, and I was just kind of telling her where I was at in life and what I was up to. And she's like, you need to meet my brother, Josh. He's been to Nicaragua recently. And so Josh and I go out for beer and pizza at a place called Homegrown Pizza
Okay.
here in Holly Springs. And so,
Shout out.
yeah, yep. So he pops open his MacBook Pro, shows me pictures, tells me stories, and something just goes off inside my heart. And I was like, this is it. I'm going to go. So at that point, I quit my job. Had a really great job with as a project engineer. I was working with a civil and environmental construction firm that was doing clean water and wastewater treatment plants.
Locally?
Yep. We were based in Apex. They still have an office in Apex. And so it was a great first job out of college. But so I quit that job and sold my house, sold my car, and bought a ticket to go volunteer for this other organization in Nicaragua.
Now, real quick, were you married at the time? Were you single?
I was not married.
Not married?
Yeah. Yeah. That question always comes when I'm telling this part of the story.
Yeah.
Because that would have been tough news to break to most wives. So, but yeah, I was single at the time. And so, Josh had spent a lot of time in Nicaragua. And so I was like, Josh, you should go with me to Nicaragua. I didn't know a thing, didn't speak Spanish. He did. And he said, no thanks. I've had my time in Nicaragua. And I'm thinking, oh, no. So anyway, several weeks later, the Lord speaks to Josh. I remember him texting me a scripture from Matthew, and somehow God had spoke to him in that scripture and said, no, you need to go back. So we both went and spent the better part of a year there. And I kind of had this idea that if I went and spent a year of my life and gave it to God and went and charged something for the kingdom, that we'd make a big impact, and then perhaps I could go on with the rest of my life,
Yeah, check that box and kind of move forward.
Right. Yeah, because at that point in your life, a year seems like an eternity. I feel like every year that you live on the planet, a year seems like a little bit shorter and a little shorter because relative to your age,
Yeah.
it is.
Mhm.
So anyway, we spent that year in Nicaragua and didn't get anything done. Like I couldn't point to you like really one thing that we achieved or accomplished other than getting to know the Nicaraguan people, the culture. I learned a decent bit of the language in that year, but we came back and it was a formative year, but we really hadn't gotten anything done. So 2008, we both get married to our respective wives. And so that's kind of a big adjustment year. But this whole Nicaragua experience is just kind of rolling around in our minds. And so 2009, we were sitting at an Olive Garden, right? So at the Olive Garden, you remember they had those like brown paper placemats and they'd throw crayons on the thing. So we're like writing all these potential names of an organization down, right? And there must have been like 20 names on the thing. And not to give myself too much credit, but I wrote this name SuNica. And my co-founder Josh's wife Betty, she's Chilean. So those two got married, or they met each other in this rural village that we lived in Nicaragua. She came from Chile, he came from the States. They met there and got married. But anyway, so she circled that one and said, "That's it." we're going to name it SuNica. And I just wrote SuNica because we used to go to this internet cafe. We'd ride our bikes, or when we had a vehicle, um, we would drive this vehicle into this little town called Chichigalpa. And they had an internet cafe, and it was called Su Internet, which means your internet. And I thought it was cute. So,
Yeah.
so SuNica, but Su is a pronoun. So it kind of means, it can mean his, hers, yours, or their. So it's the idea that it's their Nicaragua. You know, the reason I wanted to work with Josh so badly is because him and Betty were so culturally aware and sensitive, and so kind of embodies the idea that hey, this is not it's not our country, but it's their Nicaragua. But if you're speaking with a Nicaraguan person, it's like it's your Nicaragua,
Yeah.
and ultimately, it's his Nicaragua, it's God's Nicaragua, it's God's world. So it kind of embodied all those things,
Mm.
and that's why we named it SuNica.
I love how simple it is, but how it just flew over my head the first time I got to know you. And then you told me, I'm like, all right, I went through AP Spanish. That should have hit me and settled. But I love the beauty of that simplicity, but how meaningful it actually is.
Yeah.
And from a nonprofit standpoint, this is something that I'm learning the older I get in a lot of the things that, I try to do is we often position ourselves as the hero of the story, and nonprofits can, without trying to, position themselves as the hero. Like, I'm going to come in, I'm going to do this, I'm going to save the people,
Mm-hmm.
rather than seeing yourself as a part of God's calling to make an impact on people for everyone,
Mm-hmm.
not for you, not just for the individual. So it is simple, but also deeply profound, the name that you guys came up with.
Well, thanks for saying that, for sure. And yeah, that is a reality. And I almost think that it's impossible for anyone in this space to enter into a work that would be considered a charitable work or nonprofit work without some element of feeling as if they are going to go and do the fixing. They're going to,
Mm.
and so there can be a hero complex in that.
Yeah.
And as you spoke to, and so it's almost impossible, especially for a younger person, to like go into that kind of a work and not feel that way. And
Mm.
so it's something that I think, you know, time, maturity, and God himself has to deal with
Yeah.
in us as we live out that work.
Yeah.
And, uh, being 45 and doing this for almost 20 years now, there's kind of I could walk you through a lot of different things in my life where God kind of had to like do some paring away of that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a constant thing in our lives is false identities, gaining our identity from something that isn't actually what God wants us
Mm-hmm.
to gain it, and having not knowingly wrong motives that lead to God doing holy work in us to turn it into something much better. I was having a conversation earlier this week specifically around foster care and adoption. And I can look back at our process of adopting our son through the foster system
Mm-hmm.
and see a lot of beautiful right motives, but I can also see wrong motives that were focused on me and my relationship with God, like
Mm-hmm.
trying to earn closeness with God
Sure.
by being faithful. And so it is amazing how much God uses our brokenness, our sinfulness,
Mm-hmm.
our even what our like holiness and righteousness
Mm-hmm.
look like are still filled with wrong motives.
Sure.
And so that's incredibly profound. So I want to pull us back real quick though.
Sure.
I asked the question, got us like deep into the catalyst and how this whole thing came about, but tell us what SuNica is. Like, what do you guys actually do?
For sure. Yeah. So SuNica is a nonprofit. Our mission is to make disciples of Jesus through clean water, education, and mentorship. So, I mentioned being a part of an organization or construction company that was building water and wastewater. So I think that was just sort of in me. And, you know, that time of living in Nicaragua, those are kind of three of the things that we experienced in that year that we needed to just live in the midst of for a year's time to kind of understand it. So, like a lack of access to clean water, right? Broken water systems and water points, many of which were built by, outside organizations. And then now there's nobody there to fix things and they just have gone by the wayside, completely defunct systems. Um, kids' education, right? We lived in a host home with kids who went to school, and so we kind of saw how things were going down, and getting to know communities and seeing kids drop out of school at 13, 14. Guys feel the pressure to go into the fields and make money and work when they grow up, start get a little muscle, and they're like, I can go actually make it happen for my family and not be a burden. And so that pressure takes them out of school early.
And real quick, what kind of fields? What are they
Oh yeah,
working
so
in there?
yeah, there's various things. Sugar cane's a big thing, and then you've got beans, frijoles, and sorghum, and all kinds of other things. But yeah, so those are some of the main things. And then obviously the ladies, like once a young man is out working every day, and he feels like he's entered into a season of manhood, it's like it's really hard to stop that love train. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So a lot of young ladies end up pregnant at that same age, and then they're probably going to drop out of school at that point. So there's an important work to be done there to try to mentor kids into staying into school for as long as they possibly can, because there are studies that show for every year that a person in the developing world, or really in any part of the world, for every year that you stay in school, there's a direct correlation to future earnings. And while money's not the solution to every problem, in this part of the world, like making those increases is the difference between life and death sometimes. So anyhow, and then the last thing, we were kind of engaged with some local church stuff and just seeing kids that you know perhaps believed in God. They had some semblance of faith for sure. Faith in Nicaragua. There's a lot of faith in Nicaragua, but kids that actually were learning how to live their lives following Jesus, like with an interactive, like real relationship with Jesus. Like that was something that I think it's lacking all over the world, not just there, but it was something we wanted to engage. So that's kind of like what we do. So we've got our marquee kind of like coming out program or project with a community is going to be a clean water project. So this is not just a well. I think there's a lot of places in the world where a simple hand pumped or foot pumped well, community well, might be the right play. But where we work in Nicaragua, we feel very confident that a kind of a full on system is more appropriate. And if we can get them to that point, they can actually financially sustain it. So this would be a deep water well, a gigantic tank with some elevation, pipe works and distribution to the whole community, and water meters at each and every person's home there at the end. So, and that's probably not even the heavy lift, right? Like that's not the hardest part. So we also um, help the community build out a public works department within their own rural community. And there's actually legislation in Nicaragua, and there's kind of parameters around what a local small rural water committee is supposed to look like. And so we walk a community through the process of building that out so that they can actually operate, own, and maintain their water system once
Yeah.
we're done. So that's kind of the water piece.
Yeah.
And then the education and mentorship piece, like, once we're working in a community doing this water project, we're getting to know everybody, building rapport. And so at some point, we introduce them to what we call our Thrive program. So that's kind of an education and discipleship programming for young people. And so we've never had any real pushback on that. Everybody's like, yeah, bring it on, you know? So we have a team of young adults, all believers, passionate about their faith in Jesus. And so they spend several days a week in each of the communities where we're working. And so there's kind of like a tiered pipeline of leadership. So we kind of have like a pre-leadership program, And that's like a year at least of discipleship training to kind of take young local kids who live in the community to a place where they might actually be able to lead a small group. And so our staff kind of trains them through that. And then they kind of launch this big program, which is, I don't know, maybe a mashup between like a church youth group and Young Life and Big Brother, Big Sister.
Okay.
So then they've got like a big thing that they do every week where all the kids come together and play a bunch of games and just have fun and be kids, because that's super important.
Yeah.
A lot of kids are forced to grow up early in Nicaragua, and so it's like, anything we can do just to help kids be kids is a big positive. And then so they'll do that, and then they'll break out into their small groups and do like a small group Bible study. So that's kind of our education and discipleship programming.
So is that in like one community? Does SuNica work with like one local community and that's it? Are you in multiple communities? Like, what does that side of it
No,
look
so
like?
we're currently doing that in 6 communities.
Okay.
And the typical MO would be to start with that water project and then move into the Thrive program. There's been some instances where maybe we were working in a community that already had access to clean water, and so we could just go straight to the education and discipleship stuff. So we're in 6 communities doing that. We're finishing up our 4th major water project and starting our 5th, basically right now.
How long does it take to do a water project?
So we've had them start to finish soup to nuts in 24 months, so
Wow.
2 years. But we've also had them take as long as 5 years. So our largest project was a community of 440 homes or so, and 2,000 plus people, probably 13 kilometers of piping to the community. And it was just, it was a really difficult project. And we're mostly digging these trenches by hand. And so
Wow.
that particular community was really rocky. I've got some great videos of of us just busting through rock. You might install one piece of pipe in one day. So
Wow.
that one was a long one, but
So how big is your team then? Like, you have these different locations. How many people do you have on the ground in Nicaragua?
yeah. So we have about 40, maybe 42 in Nicaragua at this point. Here in the States, it's just me and 3 others. So just hired our 4th, actually. 2 part-timers right now and 2 full-timers here in the States. But in Nicaragua, we have 41 or 42.
Okay.
So
Each time you get a new location, do you have to bring on a new team to the organization?
sometimes,
Yeah.
at least every 2 communities, we'd have to bring on 2 new discipleship coordinators.
Yeah.
So 2 discipleship coordinators can really operate in 2 communities. Yeah. But we also have, so we have our water and sanitation division. So that team, we've got our discipleship coordinators. We have to have a pretty robust accounting and compliance team to make sure that we're doing everything above board in Nicaragua. And then we also have a camp, which I didn't mention earlier. But so there's a kind of a discipleship camp experience. Um, we were, I don't know, just super blessed. There's an old guy named Jim, and his wife's name is Sarah Hornsby. So they founded Young Life in Nicaragua back in the 70s,
Yeah.
I believe. And so, Young Life didn't exist. And at this point, Young Life is all over Latin America. And it started right there with Jim and Sarah in Nicaragua. And
Mhm.
so Jim built the program out. And if you're familiar with Young Life, they have camps all over the world, really. And camp's a big deal for Young Life, right? And so Jim retired from Young Life in 2013, I believe, and then set out to do kind of his like final life's work, which was to build a more intimate retreat in Nicaragua, and he called that the Sacred Forest. So, he was in his mid to late 70s when he met Josh, my co-founder, and we should have Josh tell this story really, but basically the first time they met, Jim said, "I'm going to gift you this property," and at that point, I think it was maybe 100 acres in the rainforest, and then that did happen, and then Jim continued to buy more more land. And so now it's about a 200-acre little like rainforest preserve. Um, and his heart was for there to be like a very intimate retreat experience there. So no more than 24 people on the property at a time. And so, yeah, so that's about 10 of our staff right there that kind of are up there. We run about 35 group trips a year. So all the kids that are part of our discipleship programming, down the mountain, like they get an opportunity at least once a year to go do a weekend in the sacred forest.
Mm,
So,
so cool. So when you were doing your first job out of college, you got a degree in construction. Was it construction management? What was the title?
yeah, I think it was called construction technology was what Appalachian State called it at the
Okay.
time.
So you got that degree. You go straight into using the degree. How novel is that? Not many people do
I know.
that. And then, I think as Americans, we overlook constantly the benefit of clean water. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's not something that I am rarely ever thinking about. But when you were working on that engineering side of it, could you tell the importance of it for a community? Like, did that help you understand the importance and why it would be more important for a developing country?
You mean once I set foot in Nicaragua
No,
or
before
prior
you
to that?
stepped in, like in your first job where you were working
Mm-hmm.
on clean water stuff here in the US,
Yeah, yeah. No,
like did it help you realize how important it was?
no. I think it was just a job, man.
Yeah.
Like got out of college and had a connection at this company. And most of the folks who were getting hired to do the job I was doing were engineers.
Okay.
So they were on a track to get their PE license, and they were coming from engineering schools, NC State, UNC Charlotte, or wherever. And I came from App State, and yeah, so it was just kind of a practical, like, hey, here's a great opportunity.
Yeah.
Could have been a career job for me. And so, but you know what I did learn? I wasn't thinking about this in terms of like the actual product that we were providing
Yeah.
to humanity, the civil nature of what we were doing,
Mhm.
right? It's like, the company was called like Crowder Civil and Environmental. But to me as a young kid, it was just a job. Um, but Greg, what it really did for me, um, in the world of business was to help me understand that, um, I didn't have to have like, knowledge of every single piece and part of a wastewater treatment facility in order to build it, you
Mm.
know, and nobody did. Like nobody at the company had all the knowledge, you know. I would look at these sets of plans and they were like gigantic and they would be very confusing at first. But then the next thing I know, I was like directing traffic for, subcontractors and putting boots on the ground to like build these, you know, pretty serious systems. They were like, I think the first thing that we did was like a headworks facility. It was like the first facility that receives wastewater from the city. So you got
Mm.
these like gigantic, like 6 foot tall, like twin pipe systems that are bringing all the wastewater from Raleigh. And we had to build I don't know, it was like a facility that was almost like a football field, but underground, like 25 feet underground.
Wow.
And so, I realized that like, if you could like put the right parts and pieces together and you had the funding, you could kind of do anything.
That is a good realization.
Yeah.
Not one I was thinking of. So you have an organization that the primary work is in Nicaragua. You are here. Your family is here. What does it look like to manage an organization
Hmm.
from the US when it's
Yeah. I
in
feel like
another country?
I feel like I can't answer that question without telling you a little bit about Josh and I
Yeah.
and our relationship.
Yep.
So, I lived with Josh in Nicaragua in like a little rural house. We were guests for just your average rural Nicaraguan family. And they put us in the nicest side of the house and we had a bathroom actually, which was there's only a few bathrooms with flush toilets in the community. We actually had one. So we felt very fortunate for that. But that year, man, I just like getting to know Josh and his wife Betty. What I picked up about them was their cultural sensitivity, their ability to speak Spanish at a very high level. Obviously, his wife's Chilean, so
Yeah.
she's a native
Yeah.
Spanish speaker. And Josh was really, really good, and uh, just spent a lot of time like figuring out the parts and pieces of the Spanish language and knew it very, very well. And they could in having all these meetings and interactions with Nicaraguan folks would pick up on just nuance, like really important nuance that if you're kind of translating at a high level, you're going to miss out on, but it's really important stuff. And so I was I was so excited to build something with Josh because, his ability to like live and operate in Nicaragua was second to none, and he's always said that he plans to live and die there. Like he doesn't plan to come back.
Yeah.
They have a house there. Two of their kids were born there. So I don't know that I would have started SuNica if Josh wasn't with me,
Yeah.
and I love Nicaragua. I love being there. But I didn't feel necessarily called to live there. And he did. And so like kind of God had ordained and, arranged all this stuff. And it wouldn't have happened if I didn't have those pieces. But so what does it look like? I mean, so here's the weird thing. I had this desire to fundraise. You remember like for the Africa thing
Yep.
when I was the
Yep.
fundraiser guy? So love doing that. And then, at the outset of SuNica, I remember that Josh's parents kept asking us, and they're from Boston, right? So they have the great Boston accent, right? So his mom would always be like, Alan, who's the sending organization? That's a terrible
I liked
Boston
it.
accent, but she would just ask me like, "Who's the sending organization?" And I'm like, "What is this sending organization?" Like, I had no idea. I didn't even know that terminology, but and finally when Josh was like, "Alan," like he explains to me what a sending organization is, and I'm like, "Oh, yeah, there is no sending organization. Like we are the sending, like we're going to start an organization, and we're going to take care of Josh and Betty." And so that was always my heart, is just to take care of them as they kind of ran the mission on the ground. And not that I don't have anything to do with like decision making, and I'm communicating via WhatsApp with some of my staff every week, especially about water projects, because it's just that's kind of how I'm wired.
Yeah.
I'm a little bit more project based, and Josh is way more relational. So yeah, basically, if you wanted to think about it in the most simple terms possible, I raise the money and Josh spends it. So that's kind of how we look at it. And, he doesn't have to worry about personal fundraising. He doesn't have to worry about project fundraising. He just has to worry about, managing his team at the highest level possible. And I worry about the money, um, which I didn't think was that special or that interesting, for a long time. But as I've done this for 20 years, you just don't meet a lot of like sickos who want to raise money for a living. There's just not a lot of people that want to do that. And so I'm kind of weird in that way. And yeah, that's kind of what it looks like though.
Yeah. So through these years of doing this, how has God shaped and formed you and your faith through this role in this organization?
Yeah. Well, certainly through the role of being like a fundraiser,
Mm.
So starting out when you're in your mid 20s doing something like that, I was just like, storm the castle, let's do this. It's like it was super exciting. And I thought like I can be a fundraiser, and I'm going to fundraise in and amongst every person I've ever met. Every family member, every friend is going to be subjected to my fundraising antics, and they're still going to love me just as much on the other side. And I think for whatever reason, like God had gifted me with the ability to think that. um, that was not 100% true. You know, it did. I did tax my relationships. Um, I think of people every time this conversation comes up, or this comes up in my mind. Like people pop into my mind that I pushed too hard, or that
Mm.
I didn't manage that relationship well enough.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so having to reckon with the reality that like when I walk into a room of my peers, of 45-year-old people who have been working for 20 something years in the professional world, and A lot of them have made a lot of money and been very successful. Like I'm the guy, I'm the fundraiser guy. I'm the guy that's asking for your purse strings. And so um, that has caused me to reckon with myself and reckon with God more than anything in life, I think.
Mm.
Yeah. I remember in 2019, I took a sabbatical, which is great, right? When you take a sabbatical and you tell your friends from the business world you're taking a sabbatical, and they're like, oh,
Let's go hang
great.
out.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Must be nice, the ministry life. And so I did that, and I was like so excited to just be able to hang out with people outside of the realm of like doing ministry or being a fundraiser. So I had this idea that I was going to become a wine connoisseur and buy a bunch of really good wines and just have people over. I'm not even that into wine, but it just seemed like a fun thing to do. So I'm going to have all these people over throughout this 3 month sabbatical and just hang out with no pretense of fundraising. And Greg, I didn't have. I think we had people over once in
Mm.
3 months, so I didn't realize how exhausted I was. And as extroverted as I am, like I was tapped. So just just spent the whole time alone with my family. Not totally alone, but just with my family and just kind of spent a lot of time in the woods and doing my own thing. And I was shocked by that. So um, I don't even remember what your question was and how we got here, but
I I think I lost myself on the question too, but I love the answer.
okay.
No, it was how has God shaped you and
Yeah,
formed
yeah.
you through this process?
Yeah. So certainly in that way.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that also it's not like we've ever been like flush with cash as an organization, like we we're funded by individuals and some churches and but there's not like a lot of corporate money out there for niche Christian organizations operating in you know these corners of the world, and then also um, just other grant money. There's not government grants out there funding this kind of thing. So it's all friends and family and really organic forms of fundraising. So we've just never had a ton of money, but it seems like doing this professionally now for I think how many years, maybe 15 or so. I've actually been doing this as like maybe my primary vocation,
Yeah.
but it seems like we always have what we need. And I could always, this is true, I could always go back in the year and find a point in the year when if one person hadn't made the donation that they made within the trailing 12 months, we'd be broke. And so it's not like, you know, I guess you would think after doing that for 15 years that I would just have so much faith that I wouldn't worry about money. I wouldn't worry about the, hitting budget and taking care of my staff. I still do, you know, I still have seasons of the year when there's like more anxiety roiling around up in here than I'd like to admit. So, but yeah, but the reality is like, God has like come through and just provided in crazy ways over the years. And it's not like I've ever had to like go to my donor base and say, "Hey, we're gonna die. Like we're gonna be bankrupt if somebody doesn't do something." I've never had to make that call.
Mm.
Like so, like the Lord just he takes care of us. He brings us what he needs. Doesn't blow us out of the water. We're not sitting on so much cash that we can say, hey, let's like we've got $1 million in the bank. Let's go figure out like what good we can do with it within the context of our ministry. Like we've never been in that position. So we've always been in the position of, hey, we're gonna go do this. Like we feel called to build this community center, for example, in this place that we feel deeply needs a safe space for kids to come and just be kids. And it's gonna take more money than we've ever spent on any one thing, but let's go do it. So we've always kind of had to like live
Yeah,
in that world. Um, and that does grow your faith.
absolutely. It really makes you have to be in step with the Lord, be pursuing Him, and not just relying on yourself.
Hmm.
Which I know is my natural inclination is I don't want to rely on anyone, including God. I just want to rely on myself. And so
Sure.
I constantly have to push that off
Hmm.
and recognize that I am in need, um, and seek Him. Uh, but the world wants us to just like, you can do it. Just take care of yourself.
Sure.
So, speaking about fundraising, money, and those kinds of things, I know through our conversations that you're bivocational. You also um, do rehabilitation on houses, do fix and flips. Is that
Hmm.
accurate
Yes.
description? Um, so, talk to me a little bit. You don't have to get into numbers, but talk to me a little bit about, you know, how you provide for your family and how that has come into it,
Hmm.
doing multiple things, and how you balance, yeah, providing for your family through ministry and nonprofit work, but also through, you
Hmm.
know, the business corporate world.
Sure. Well, I mean, Greg, I would consider myself an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
I do. I'm always thinking about business ideas, especially in my younger years. Just always wanted to try everything you could possibly imagine in the business world. And, there's a lot, in a lot of ways, I'm like, I only got like 80, maybe 100 years on the planet. Like, I'm only going to be able to do a few things in life. And that like kills me. I'm just like, there's so many fun things that we could do and build out. And there's only so much time to do
Yeah.
what we do. And so, um, and the Lord has continuously a couple of times has told me to stay in it with SuNica. But back in 2019 ish, I was starting to feel like I might have a little bandwidth to do something else. And I'd never allowed it, from 2013 when we went full time
Yeah.
at SuNica to 2019, I would not allow myself to think about other business ideas. Like they would start to form in my mind and I would just cut it off and say, no, not going to do it.
Now, real quickly, is this tied to the same time as the sabbatical? Yeah. That is when you started figuring that out.
Correct.
Okay. So
Yeah.
keep going.
Yeah. So right about the time this sabbatical is about to happen, we had experienced a little bit of a there was a little bit of a crisis in Nicaragua, and so we we were not able to do trips at the same clip that we were doing them, and so things had slowed down a little bit. And I was at the point where I was like, man, this is so hard. It was getting so hard for me to just stay in it and do the same thing because we'd kind of built the organization, and that was fun, right? As an entrepreneur, the building of the thing is the most fun. And then once you get to a point where you're kind of operating the thing, it's not as much fun for an entrepreneur. And so, I kind of arrived at that point and was just like, oh God, I want to do something else. And so, and I was also getting to the point where my kids were starting to get a little bit older and I knew that finances were going to start to like change, you know, my wife and I were able to. My wife's been great, Casey. I literally married her in part because she was like in love with Latin American culture and was teaching at a missionary school in Bogota, Colombia, and we actually got engaged in Bogota. But she's been great and allowed me to do this thing, and you know, frugal lady, not she doesn't need a whole lot of fancy stuff, and so she was okay with us being poor for a season, right? But then, your kids start to get older and you're starting to think, okay, I got two daughters, Sam and Macy's 15, they're 15 and 12 now. And it's like, okay, starting to see the future of like, they're going to need cars. They're going to get married someday. You're going to college, and, and I'm also having this personal desire just to try something else, And so I took a sabbatical and right about that same time, I asked my board if I could cut my salary and do some house flipping. And they were like, sure. And so that's what I did. And then, so during my sabbatical, I was doing a little bit of like, renovating houses and kind of toying around with like how much I actually needed to be involved in the day to day. I'd never done that before. So, um, So yeah, I had carved out some time in my professional schedule to be able to do that. And that was super fun, learned a ton. Took on some projects that were probably too much. Um, and then, of course we hit COVID. And
Yeah.
then once again, we had like time. So some of those projects that I took on that were too much to be running a ministry and to be doing construction management at the same time happened during COVID, which was like a beautiful thing because we weren't able to do events anyway,
Yeah.
So, but I learned enough to realize that, okay, there's this type of like fix and flip. There's like really intense, you know, additions where you're practically building a new house. It's like probably more work than building a house from the ground up when you're trying to tie in a new house into like an old house. And so I learned that, okay, as fun as it is, and as cool as that project was, like it's just not conducive to, you know, what I need to be doing with my life.
Yeah.
Right. So I kind of figured out how to do a certain brand of fix and flip
Yeah.
that doesn't cost me as much time and energy. And, over the course of several years, built out a pretty good team to where I've got, trusted kind of mid level managers or foremen that can kind of manage stuff. So at this point, my fix and flip world is like, I mostly do simple stuff that I don't have to be on site for. So,
So, what percentage, if you had to put a percentage of your income, is from the fix and flip versus the nonprofit?
it's about 50-50.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I spend probably 95% of my time now with SuNica.
Okay.
So, like I said, I was able to get the fix and flip thing to a place where it just kind of works. And I'm not doing masterpiece renovations. I'm doing like really, really solid, respectable renovations in like more rural markets outside of town.
Yeah.
And so it's not as demanding.
Mm.
And, but it does allow me to earn some extra income while still focusing mostly on SuNica. And we're kind of going through a period at SuNica where um, just totally redefining like the way that I operate the company from a stateside
Yeah.
perspective. And so it's expensive from a time perspective right now. So I'm kind of doubling down on some things to try to create an organization that can maybe sustain for some years. So
Yeah. So, you alluded to this in one of the things you were saying a little bit back, but I'd love to talk through. You've gone through at least one season, but I think you said multiple seasons of asking God, am I done with this nonprofit?
yeah.
Is my role here finished?
Mm-hmm.
So, can you tell us a little bit about why, like, what are some of the reasons why you question whether you were done or if you could be done? Um, and then share about how God sort of laid it on your heart that you weren't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So 2020. So it was 2020 and 2024
Okay.
that I kind of asked that question. Like I was actively asking that question to God. Like, can I make the moves necessary to maybe make an exit? And not that I feel like I need to completely dissociate or anything like that, but maybe just not be like the guy that's running all the fundraising. Um, so probably the impetus to that is just the pressure that comes from having to raise a certain amount of money to keep all these people employed and just be straight up. Like I wish I could just like nonchalantly go about that work and be completely faithful that God is always going to provide and never worry about it. But that would be a lie. So that is something that, I've had to continuously wrestle with
Yeah.
and definitely made strides, definitely, definitely. Like last year, I remember I was cool as a cucumber all the way through about early May. And so our big fundraiser is in August, which you joined us for.
I
Actually,
did. That was awesome.
you serendipitously sat next to me,
I did.
right?
Yep.
And then right before I got up to speak, you put your hand on my shoulder and prayed for me.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, which I barely knew you at the time, so that was cool. But so that August dinner, that's like our biggest fundraiser
Mm.
of the year. So there's there's almost like a ticking clock in a fundraiser's head when you're driving towards a moment in the year when you know things have to you have to hit certain numbers,
Yeah.
or you feel like you do. You
Yeah.
really don't, because God can fund the thing any which way, and I've seen that
Yeah.
happen. So,
But from a strategic standpoint, and for you as a human planning,
correct.
it seems like that's where it needs to be.
It feels like that, and so the temptation is to worry about it.
Yeah.
You know, and normally about May I'll start to worry about that, and then it'll just be this like daunting like ticking clock in my head until we hit that night. We raise a certain amount of our budget for the year, and then I can breathe a sigh of relief,
Yeah.
right? And so last year I was just really praying like, God, why am I not trusting you on it? I need to trust you on this year. I can't spend 6 months of the year like a total stress ball. You know what I mean? And so I was praying that prayer. And I think I've loosely prayed that prayer for years now. And so last year was great, man. I think I got to about July 1st and was like completely just fine with it. And then about July, it's like, okay, late August 20th is coming, um, so that was a huge step in the right direction. But what was the question again? Where are we going?
Yeah. So, um, the seasons of questioning God and
Oh yeah,
whether
yeah,
you can
yeah.
be done. So, like,
So I think it's that.
so the reason that you felt like is just the weight of fundraising
Right.
and
Right. And so I think that's part of it is just that I'm like, I don't know if I want to feel that again for another 3 or 4 months of the year,
yeah.
and so
And so you told me about going to this retreat place for this last one in 2024,
hmm
um, to just spend time alone with God and seek Him to see. So, what was that like, and what was the answer God gave you about leaving SuNica?
yeah, so that one was like extremely gentle in the way that God delivered that. There's no magic.
Yeah,
There was no audible voice from heaven, but but I had intentionally gone to this prayer center a couple hours away just to spend a night and a day
mm,
opening myself up to whatever God might have for me, and to ask that question once again, like, is it time? And it was literally the first night, like I hadn't even spent the night there yet. And I just felt the Lord put on me, like, nope, like stay in it, Alan. And you're gonna have a team. Like, not not in plain English, just like this, like in my head, like you're gonna have a team thing. And I was like, I'm gonna have a team. Why am I supposed to be excited about that? Like that's whatever. I didn't have like my heart wasn't like excited about having a team. But here's God putting this like thing in my head, or the Holy Spirit, like, you're gonna have a team. And I'm supposed to be excited about that. But I was like, I was trying to be a good soldier and like, sir, yes, sir, I'll stay in it, and I'm gonna have a team. And then as things progressed over the next 2 years, basically our annual fundraising increased by 50% in 2 years. And we'd been stuck at the same place for probably 6 years. And so all of a sudden, once again, expenses have grown in Nicaragua, and it's not like we're flush with cash, but all of a sudden it's possible that maybe I could have a team. And so I had randomly hired this consultant, and he had walked us through this reimagining of our organizational chart, right? So we all know what an org chart is, right? Typically, you have a CEO up at the top, and then lines and boxes, and all the staff down below that. And so that's how I'd always built an org chart. Well, he encouraged me to build an org chart upside down, and they don't call it an org chart. They call it a function and accountability chart. And you start at the bottom, so your CEO's at the bottom, and then everybody goes up from there. So you don't refer to your staff as your direct reports. You refer to them as your direct supports.
I like that.
You're directly supporting these people. And so I go through this process, and I think I had 3 people on staff when we did this exercise. And the exercise was to imagine in 1 year from now, without stretching the budget too badly, so you're not like being unrealistic,
Yeah.
but like what could your organization look like? And I'm thinking about it from a stateside perspective, right? Josh
Uh-huh.
has 40 something, but I only have, working with me here in the States, I only had me and two others. The next thing I know, I have this imagined organization with six positions. And it's not terribly out of the realm of possibility. And so one thing that reminds you that like, oh, we've been trying to do a lot with just me and really I only had one other one from August to through the end of the year last year, and we were doing all the stuff just me and him. And so, and then this gal who worked for me for 2 years, a couple of years ago, fantastic employee. She'd actually stepped away because her and her husband were taking on a second foster uh, child, and she didn't think she could um, do both.
Yeah.
So they'd sort of gotten things situated over the course of 2 years. She calls me back, wants to work, and I'm just like, I just hired this other person, and now we do this function and accountability exercise, and I'm realizing that you actually do have the budget to hire a fourth, and you just imagined yourself with six a year from now. So I called her back and said, come on, let's do this thing. So 2 years ago, God's like, you're gonna have a team, and then all of a sudden the finances are at a place where we can actually do that. And um, so, Greg, my mentality for for running SuNica was always this. If I'm going to have somebody come help me on the state side of things, my disposition towards them was come with me and suffer.
Mm.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
And that's no way to run a team. Um, and there's some reasons for that. There is a pressure in the nonprofit world to operate as lean as you can possibly operate so that you can show your donors and the big wide world out there that you're not being irresponsible
Yeah.
with money. And so um, I think that pressure has been too great and has inhibited a lot of NGOs and nonprofits from being able to make the moves that they need to make, because we're trying to solve like big problems and doing that at a gigantic deficit. And so in the business world, you can justify your operational and marketing expenses to the moon and back.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't matter how much money you spend as long as there's a return.
Yeah.
Nobody cares about any ratio there. But with nonprofits, it's like you better keep that sucker down to like an 80% programs, 20% fundraising and admin.
Yeah.
And if you don't, like you're somehow a bad nonprofit. And that equation just doesn't work across the board with small nonprofits. Sometimes there's a startup period where you really need to invest heavily in staff and systems in order to make it possible to go, attack the mission or do the mission that you're trying to do. And so anyway, that's kind of an aside.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is like, God did this cool thing over the course of a couple of years of like, telling me I'm going to have a team, telling me to stay in it. And then all of a sudden that's starting to come to fruition here in 2026.
Yeah. Yeah. And you were mentioning God is laying on your heart to deeply pour into these people and care for them as well. Right. We were having a little conversation the other day about that.
Yeah.
And just navigating that new space of not only having a team, but looking out for their well-being.
Sure. Yeah, no. So part of that coaching that I'm going through, our coach invited me to look at all these different positions, including my own position, and come up with like 3 obsessions. Like not the task list, not the job description, not like what you're actually doing in your job, but like what are you obsessed with? Like, and what do you want your staff members to be obsessed with? And so I kind of reimagined mine, and what we came up with was team culture and big relationships, which is favorite part of my job, just meeting with all the donors that help make it happen and just being a part of their life and having lunch with them. Favorite thing to do. So I'm glad that's still in there. And then number 3 was like mission, impact, and strategy. But number 1 being team culture. Like just compare the difference between come with me and suffer
Yeah.
versus being obsessed about team culture. So now I'm not, now it's like, no, it's not come with me and suffer. It's like, how can I take care of my staff? How can I make sure that they're paid as much as I can like reasonably pay them? How, like what benefits can we deploy upon them? Like what fun stuff can we do as an organization? And and what kind of like space do I need to create to just have good conversations with my staff so that they can
Mm.
open up and tell me like what what's going on in their life, professionally and at home. And
Right.
it's, it's something that my co-founder Josh doesn't have a problem with. Like in Nicaragua, we have a 3.5 hour staff meeting every Monday morning.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it's like, and everybody loves it for the most part.
Yeah.
It's like if we tried to do a 3.5 hour staff meeting every Monday in a North American organization, like there would be a mutiny. It just wouldn't happen.
Yeah.
So no, in Nicaragua, dude, they start out, they do, what do they do? They do a game. They start out with a game, which can last as long as they want it to last. It might be 15 minutes, it might be 30, and then they're going to do a little snack breakfast thing together. And then they're going to do celebrations. They're going to, there might be 30 people in the room celebrating like what God did last week. And then Josh is going to do a teaching, which he's real big on the Bible Project. And so he's doing a series leading through some Bible Project stuff. And then they're going to do prayer requests.
Mm.
And that might take 30 minutes. And then they're going to pray. And by the time that's over with, they have a team lunch. And that's the first half of the first day of the week. And, from the North American perspective, you're just like, wow, that's a lot, And if I was leading things down there, I wouldn't do that. Like I couldn't do that. But I still value the heck out of Josh for doing it. And I think it's worth it. And I was joking with one of my staff members down there once, like basically said to him, like, if I was running this thing down here, like we would not do that meeting like that. And, we'd have like a 10-minute devotional and then get on to work. And this staff member, she looks at me and she's like, but Alan, if we did that, like, how would we grow together as a team and be prepared to go after the rest of the week together? And I'm like, I know, I get it. Like, I know I'm not saying I'm right. I'm just saying I wouldn't do it that way. And, but I'm glad he does.
This is just a reminder of how God wires and gifts each of us uniquely for where we're at.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we have to grow into that. And who knows, maybe your meeting with your team locally is going to grow not to that point, but to something, and something that the team actually is excited about.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of uphill battles in American culture. And
For sure.
So getting past those with a faith-centric Christian worldview can be challenging at times. So one of the ways that I like to end these conversations is to think retrospectively and give advice to yourself 20, 25 years ago. So you're graduating college, you're just navigating the landscape of career, trying to figure out how can I do something that is purposeful. Knowing what you know now at 45, what advice would you give to little Alan back graduating from Appalachian State at 22, 23 years old?
Mm-hmm. Oh, man. There's so many ways you can answer that question, and so many different ways to think about it.
Just give me your favorite way.
Yeah. So it's part of a men's cohort called Six Stones.
Okay.
That's something that's been kind of created by this local psychologist named Jason Young, right? And so it's about 30 guys at a time doing a year and a half cohort, doing some deep work. A lot of, he reads us a lot of poetry and stuff. It just takes us to a different place as men of like understanding like what's going on in our hearts and in our minds. But anyway, there's an older gentleman there named Barney Ford. I don't know how old he is, but I'm not going to guess.
Yes.
In case he watches this.
Older than you.
He's older than me. And he basically gave us his answer to the question, and it resonated deeply with me. because, humanity and our culture is so performative, and so the temptation would be to give myself a tip that would enhance my performance throughout life. But Barney, being towards the end of his time here on the planet, um, talked about just the ways in which God has opened himself up to Barney in the later part of his life, and he was talking about these thin spaces where the space, or times when the space between heaven and earth seems to fade away, and
Mm.
and God seems to speak to him um, more powerfully, but not necessarily with direction, but with just a deep sense of like acceptance and love. And he answered this question by saying, if he was to be able to speak to his younger self, that he would say, just keep going, like you're on the right path. You're chasing the right guy, you're chasing the right person in Jesus Christ, then you're on the right path.
Mm.
So against my nature, I think that's where I'm at right now. That's what I'd say to myself.
Mm.
There's a great poem actually by this guy, Rainer Maria Rilke, that I haven't quite totally memorized it, but it's like something to the effect of like God speaks to each of us as he makes us and then walks with us silently out into the night. These are the words we dimly hear. Flare up like a flame and make big shadows I can move in. No feeling is final. Just keep going. Give me your hand. And I may have just botched it, but I sense that poem as being like pretty relevant to where I'm
Mm.
at this point in my life,
Yeah.
and God doesn't always give us the full picture,
Mm.
or actually he almost never does. It's almost like, God just coaxes us out. Um, there was another piece in that I missed that was something about go to the limits of your longing. And there's certainly an element of like following Christ where, we think that we have to just go do the hard thing,
Yeah.
but there's a sense in which he's calling us into the limits of our longing. Like that God calls us into places that, um, that light up the inside of us, that light up our hearts,
Mm.
like at the end of the day, Josh and I went and did the thing that we did, not as a sacrifice, but out of a place of desire. There was a desire to go do
Yeah.
a lot of that stuff. And so, yeah.
I love how challenging that sentiment is. And like, you and I being in our 40s are theoretically in sort of the middle of our life.
Mm-hmm.
It could be the very end or it could be still in the earlier half. We don't know. But I would say one of the biggest holdups I probably do have in my faith and walk is the uncertainty in which direction I'm going. Like, I helped plant a church in Oregon. You get to a season where, like, God, am I moving in the right direction? Is this where you want me? We moved back to California, built a production company, get to a season where I'm like, God, is this where you want me? Is this where I'm supposed to be going? This new season in North Carolina, almost a few years in,
Mm-hmm.
I don't have clarity. But there's these different things, these pullings on my heart. And so to just truly trust, like, God, I'm going to move forward. And I don't know about for you, but most of the things that cause me to question is financially related.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't see the clear path to complete provision for my family.
Mm-hmm.
And I struggle with not believing I'm the one who has to provide. Like, truly, like you discussed earlier, truly and authentically believing that God is a perfect provider, that he has, if we look back, provided and will continue to provide. But I think the voices around us, we more consistently hear fear, anxiety. The world is going in the wrong direction. And so it makes us fear that there won't be provision at some point, rather than just seeing that consistent work of Jesus in our lives. So I love that challenge. That's going to challenge me this week as I move forward, really thinking through, how do I continue to, not just to poke the name of this podcast, but how do I persist in that purpose that God has placed before me, faithfully trusting that he is good and with us and always going ahead of us. So I'm so grateful that you came on today, that we could have this conversation.
Yeah. And the last thing that I would ever want to happen is for people to hear, for Christian folks, especially, to hear this podcast and think that, like, oh, I got to go do something like that to matter.
Yeah.
And, I can connect you with other stories that I have weaved in and out of mine, of guys that are doing stuff in the world that are, just kind of average business stuff. And they have a deeply, like, Christian, like, motivation within their mind and heart as they go about doing the thing that they do in the real world that, from an outsider's perspective, could look like just normal life, normal business. And so yeah, huge proponent of that. And
I agree. Yeah. And that's one of the points of this podcast, is to bring on a lot of those stories of a variety of different things. Obviously, and I think this probably has to do with our content culture. We're constantly being fed content of, like, inspiration and, like, what you should be inspired by, what is worth listening to or watching to. And so that often leads to us neglecting the everyday and even the mundane, which God meets us a lot in the mundane. But I think we do sometimes have a tendency to sit back in complacency and comfort, rather than fully stepping into something God may be calling us to that is hard. And so I think there's both sides of that coin. Some people can hear this story, feel like, man, I have to start a nonprofit, changing a developing country and changing people's lives dramatically. That's the way that I show God's love. It may be, I need to go be a pastor at a church. I need to become a monk, whatever it may, or they can go on the other side. Like, I'll go to church on the weekend. I will work my job. I will do as much that brings comfort and temporal happiness. But there is a medium middle ground, which I truly believe is only able to be walked well in step with the Spirit.
Absolutely. So many different ways that this can play out. And I wish we had time to, like, kind of talk about all of them today. I don't think we do, but there's so many different variations of how you could, like, walk out your faith in what you may call normal life.
Yeah, not all of it is vocationally.
Yeah.
This is very much focused on the vocational side of our lives. But man, in our families, in our neighborhood, the Bible specifically talks about loving our neighbors. There's so many different avenues that our whole life.
And we could even stay in the realm of work. I mean, we could just talk about it purely in the realm of work. Just, like, no matter what you're doing, like, out there in the world, like, there's always, like, I think Jesus always has an agenda for you. Like, he always cares deeply about, who you're talking to and how you're talking to them and what you're doing, what you're saying. And there's just so many ways that can play in. And I've got so many donors and friends that, are actually pretty good at that. Like, they might have a job that seems like kind of mundane, but they have, sussed out, like, a very, like, clear calling from God that may, have something to do with, like, the actual work that they're doing, or it may have to do with their coworker, or how they're interacting with their coworkers and how they're loving them.
Right.
So
Yeah. Well, dude, I'm so appreciative of your time. I'm appreciative that you could share your story with those who are listening or watching. For those of you who sat in, listened to this, watched this, I just hope that you're encouraged, that you're reminded that living a purpose filled life requires action and being proactive, but it also requires just sitting back and trusting the Lord in it. So, thank you as always for watching, for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.